Rejection is an experience that every human being faces at some point in life. It may come in various forms, romantic, professional, or social. Whether it is a job interview that didn't go as planned, a friendship that grew apart, or a romantic partner deciding to end things, rejection stings. It has the power to bring us face to face with our vulnerabilities, shaking our self-esteem and making us question our worth. But what happens when the rejection is followed by silence? A kind of silence that feels cold, dismissive, and void of explanation? That silence, though often unintentional, can hurt far more than the rejection itself. Rejection is often seen as the climax of a conflict, the moment when things fall apart. Yet, the true impact of rejection is often defined not by the rejection itself, but by what follows. The words or lack of words spoken in the aftermath shape how the rejected person processes the experience. When silence is the response, it leaves a void where understanding and closure should be. This void festers, causing more pain than the initial rejection ever could. Imagine, for instance, a scenario where someone has confessed their feelings to a person they admire, only to be met with an ambiguous "I'm not interested" followed by absolute silence. The confession itself was a risk, a leap of faith. The rejection was painful, but what truly cuts deeply is the lack of follow-up, the absence of reassurance, explanation, or empathy. The rejected person is left to interpret that silence on their own, and more often than not, they fill that silence with self-doubt. Did I say something wrong? Was I not good enough? Did I offend them? These questions spiral, consuming mental and emotional energy that could have been spared with a few kind words. For the rejecter, silence might seem like the easiest route. It spares them the discomfort of having a difficult conversation, of facing the emotional reactions of the person they rejected. In their mind, the matter is closed, and silence becomes a boundary, a way to move forward without dwelling on what happened. But for the rejected, silence is rarely a neutral experience. It is a vacuum that sucks in insecurities, fears, and doubts. Silence after rejection often feels like abandonment, as though the person rejecting them didn't even care enough to explain their decision. This dynamic is not limited to romantic relationships. Consider the workplace. When someone applies for a job and invests time in interviews and tests, only to receive no feedback after being rejected, the lack of communication can feel demoralizing. A simple rejection letter, though painful, at least provides clarity. But silence leaves them questioning their abilities and worth. Did they fail to meet expectations? Were they even seriously considered? The absence of an answer amplifies their feelings of inadequacy, creating an emotional wound that takes longer to heal. Silence in these scenarios is not inherently malicious. It is often a product of discomfort, busyness, or a lack of understanding about its impact. The person who chooses silence may believe it is kinder to avoid confrontation, or that the rejected person understands their reasoning. But this assumption overlooks the psychological toll that silence can take. Studies have shown that the human brain perceives rejection similarly to physical pain. When silence replaces communication, it prolongs the hurt, much like leaving a physical wound untreated. For those who are rejected, silence can feel deeply personal, even when it is not intended that way. It triggers self-doubt and creates a narrative in which they are the problem. This narrative is often far from the truth, but is a natural consequence of being left to interpret silence. Without context or explanation, people fill in the blanks with their worst fears. They replay events in their minds, searching for clues or mistakes, often blaming themselves for something they couldn't control. In some cultures, silence is even normalized as an acceptable response to rejection. People are taught to avoid conflict and prioritize saving face, leading to a tendency to disengage rather than confront difficult emotions. While this approach may seem polite on the surface, it often leaves emotional wounds unhealed. as the rejected person is left to carry the burden of unanswered questions. The solution to this lies in understanding the power of communication. Words have the ability to hurt, yes, but they also have the power to heal. A kind, empathetic explanation can provide closure and clarity. For example, a person rejecting a romantic confession might say, "I deeply respect your feelings, and I'm honored that you shared them with me. However, I don't feel the same way, and I think it's best for us to remain friends." Such a response acknowledges the other person's emotions, provides clarity, and avoids leaving a void of silence. It may still hurt, but it is a pain that comes with understanding, a crucial component of healing. Similarly, in professional settings, feedback can transform rejection into an opportunity for growth. Instead of ignoring a job candidate after an unsuccessful application, a simple email offering constructive feedback can leave a lasting positive impression. It shifts the narrative from "I wasn't good enough" to "here's how I can improve." This approach respects the effort and time the rejected person invested, showing that their effort was valued, even if it wasn't the right fit. Silence may feel easier in the moment, but it often leads to greater harm in the long run. It closes doors that could have been left open for future interactions and creates emotional rifts that might never heal. By choosing communication over silence, we show respect and empathy, not just for the other person, but for ourselves as well. It demonstrates courage and emotional maturity, qualities that strengthen relationships rather than eroding them. The truth is, rejection is an inevitable part of life, but the pain it causes doesn't have to be permanent. Through thoughtful communication, we can soften the blow and help others find their footing again. Silence, on the other hand, leaves them floundering, searching for answers in a void that only deepens their hurt. If we truly value the connections we form with others, even those we must let go of, we owe them more than silence. We owe them understanding, empathy, and above all, the chance to heal. For the rejected individual, silence acts as a magnifying glass over their feelings of inadequacy. Imagine a student eagerly submitting a project to a teacher or a manager only to hear nothing in return. This silence can overshadow any pride or satisfaction they initially felt about their work. It doesn't matter if the project was good or bad, the lack of response feels like their efforts were invisible or unworthy of acknowledgement. In romantic contexts, silence post-rejection often takes on a different shape, one that is deeply personal and tied to self-worth. The person on the receiving end of such silence might begin to believe they are fundamentally unlovable or flawed, even though this is far from the truth. The emotional weight of silence is compounded by its ambiguity. When words are spoken, there is at least some clarity, even if the words are difficult to hear. Silence, however, forces the rejected person to fill in the blanks themselves. This often results in overthinking, where the rejected person replays the events leading up to the rejection repeatedly, searching for clues or hidden meanings. Was it something they said? Was it the way they looked, acted, or expressed themselves? These unanswered questions can lead to a cascade of self-doubt that erodes their confidence. For the person who rejected someone, the silence they choose often stems from discomfort. Rejection is not easy for anyone. It requires navigating emotional waters that are often fraught with tension and vulnerability. It may seem simpler to retreat into silence rather than face the consequences of their decision. Some rejectors might even convince themselves that silence is a form of kindness, sparing the other person from additional pain. Unfortunately, this perspective fails to account for the fact that silence rarely provides closure. Instead, it prolongs the emotional turmoil for the rejected party. Let us consider a workplace scenario to illustrate this further. When a candidate interviews for a job and receives no feedback afterward, they are left in limbo. Did they perform poorly? Were they out of their depth? Was there ever a real chance, or was the position already filled before their interview? The lack of communication leaves them grappling with these questions, often damaging their confidence for future opportunities. A simple, straightforward email could prevent such emotional fallout. A message like, "Thank you for applying. While we were impressed by your skills, we have chosen another candidate. At this time can provide a sense of finality and dignity." In personal relationships, silence is often used as a shield. It can feel safer to avoid responding to someone you've rejected, especially if you fear confrontation or an emotional outburst. However, this approach can backfire. Silence can feel dismissive or even cruel, particularly when the other person has made themselves vulnerable by expressing their feelings. By failing to acknowledge their courage and emotions, you inadvertently diminish their worth, even if that was never your intention. This brings us to an important question. How can we break this cycle of silence? The first step is to recognize the power of communication. Words, when chosen carefully, can act as a balm for emotional wounds. They don't have to be lengthy or poetic. They simply need to be sincere. For example, in a situation where you're not interested in pursuing a romantic relationship with someone, you could say, "I appreciate your honesty and the courage it took to share your feelings. I don't feel the same way, but I hope this doesn't take away from how much I respect you." Such a response provides clarity, compassion, and respect, all of which are crucial for helping the other person move forward. For those on the receiving end of silence, it's important to remember that someone else's choice to remain silent is not a reflection of your worth. It can be helpful to seek closure on your own terms, whether that involves reaching out to the other person one last time or finding ways to process your emotions independently. Journaling, talking to a trusted friend, or seeking therapy can be effective ways to work through the feelings of rejection and the confusion that silence often brings. Cultural norms also play a significant role in how rejection and silence are handled. In some cultures, direct confrontation is seen as impolite or overly aggressive, leading people to avoid difficult conversations altogether. While this approach may prevent immediate discomfort, it often results in long-term emotional harm. Encouraging a culture of open and empathetic communication can help shift these norms, creating spaces where people feel safe to express themselves without fear of judgment or retaliation. The workplace provides an excellent opportunity to model such behavior. Managers and leaders can set the tone by providing constructive feedback rather than opting for silence. When rejection is framed as an opportunity for growth, it becomes less about failure and more about development. Similarly, in educational settings, teachers can encourage students to view constructive criticism as a valuable part of the learning process, rather than a judgment of their abilities. Another effective strategy for breaking the silence is to involve mediators or third parties when direct communication feels too difficult. Friends, family members, or professional counselors can help facilitate conversations, ensuring that both parties feel heard and understood. While it's not always possible to resolve every conflict or misunderstanding, even the act of trying can be profoundly healing. Ultimately, the goal is not to eliminate rejection from our lives. This is impossible. Rejection is a natural part of the human experience, one that teaches us resilience, self-awareness, and empathy. What we can control, however, is how we handle rejection when it happens. By choosing to communicate rather than retreat into silence, we can transform rejection from a source of pain into an opportunity for growth and understanding. The power of closure cannot be overstated. Closure allows both the rejected and the rejected to move forward without the weight of unresolved emotions. It provides a sense of finality and dignity, enabling healing to take place. While silence leaves wounds open, communication stitches them closed, creating the foundation for new beginnings. Rejection will always hurt, but silence makes it hurt more. It adds layers of confusion and self-doubt, to an already painful experience. By breaking the silence, we can offer clarity, compassion, and respect, helping others heal and grow. Whether in our personal lives, our workplaces, or our communities, let us commit to choosing words over silence and empathy over avoidance. In doing so, we create a world where rejection, though inevitable, is no longer synonymous with pain.